Yes guys, how you doing? Welcome back to, first time I'm saying this, the Spurs 5 for my occasional update regarding all things what's going on. We're on the back end of what was a really disappointing Saturday of football from Tottenham Hotspur. It's the pre-season friendlies, and everyone's really angry right now because there's a bunch of different things happening all at once. Right, you've got pre-season friendlies that in and of themselves don't mean very much. They don't. They're glorified fitness tests in my opinion. However, at the same time, as soon as that double header yesterday against Wycombe and against Luton finished, there were damp squibs, poor performances, couldn't get a victory against either a championship team or a League One team. You had the opportunity for fan-based meltdowns in every allocation of the viewership. You had people that were just fed up with the football, that think it's more meaningful than it probably is. I don't think it's irrelevant, by the way. I think you take it with a pinch of salt. Like, I don't remember too many wonderful performances in pre-season from any Tottenham team in the last few years that sort of gave you the edge, thinking that things were going to be, sort of meaningfully different from the season prior as a consequence of what we saw in the pre-season. I mean, last couple of pre-seasons, the tours overseas, which we haven't even begun yet, were sort of damp squibs, either washed out or just injury sort of laden, etc. On top of that, so you have that meh kind of reaction, which is probably where I was coming from on my own personal take after going to the Luton game yesterday. Then you had the imminent, at the time, for those of you who have followed my personal story in the last 24 hours, that I've just about washed off, or tried to wash off, some of the the lowest hanging fruit of mud that has been covered in me for making a video that included an attempt to disseminate some information regarding some people that suggested that Morgan Gibbs-White was done. So you've got the football that's been there, the lack of successes, the fact that the team doesn't look that meaningfully different from essentially the vulnerabilities and the kind of, at times, absent without leave, creative sparks from the width, at least yesterday. Then you have the fact that Morgan Gibbs-White did Tottenham the dirty, Levy's in the mud, and then that's the third catalyst, right? So you have the fans that are unhappy with the football. You have the fans that are now unhappy with Daniel Levy, if it is in fact him that's calling the shots, because a week ago or 2 weeks ago, when we were, on the on the precipice of a double bomber in 24 hours, all the people that were Levy outers for time immemorial suddenly had pivoted to the kind of, the echelons of a new positivity. Everything was moving in the right direction. Kudus followed by Gibbs-White. Well, that can't be Daniel Levy. That must be the new era, the new world order of Tottenham merit, which, as always, in my mind, is when something's good, it can't be Daniel Levy. When something's bad, it's always Daniel Levy. I know not all the other four on the channel agree with me on this one, so my opinions don't necessarily reflect those of the other members. But the second it went terrible, were all those people that were saying, this is a new Tottenham, look what can happen, look what can materially change once that bozo's not got his hands on the steering wheel anymore. The reins are in the hands of Vinay and Charrington. Well, as soon as the second part of that double bomber falls apart and goes quiet and 2 weeks drag on, and we have just an opportunity cost where loads of our other potential targets, potential hole fillers, when they start to fall one by one, the dominoes fall like toy soldiers. As soon as that starts to sort of manifest, And then you get the kind of horrendous news last night on a personal note, but also just as a Tottenham fan, that Gibbs White ended up signing a new contract. Suddenly it's back on Daniel Levy. So you've got that wave of negativity coming back into the ecosystem. And then on top of that, you have the people that were Ange in, at the end at least, whether they were Ange out the entire time and then became Ange in at the end of a trophy, or were Ange in the whole time. Regardless, you have those guys that couldn't wait for something to go a little bit tits up so that they could come out with their all guns blazing and get out the daggers for Thomas Frank. Of which, by the way, I'm not even joking, I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different accounts on various socials that were taking the opportunity to kind of utilize the double negative of a poor Saturday's football and, you know, the bomber that was that Gibbs White stays, as a way to blame Frank, and to then by proxy of that to blame everybody that wanted Ange gone. So it is no surprise to me, it's of no surprise to me to see right now the negative waves flood back in like a tsunami over the transfer window. And if I'm entirely honest, I don't blame them. I don't blame anybody for how they feel, because right now it feels like nothing has changed. It feels like we're behind the 8 ball. It feels like we've wasted 2 weeks. All of these things are nothing to do with the football we saw on the weekend, but it feels like everybody else who was, or who used to be, not that long ago, someone that we would consider a challenger, a competitor, it feels like they have pulled away with their spend, with their ambition, with their intentions, and the only people that are left in somewhat of a similar sort of negative frequency, a negative energy that surrounds their own transfer windows, are 2 other clubs that are, I suppose, the Johnny-come-latelys to the top 6 conversation in Aston Villa and Newcastle, both of whom are sort of guilty of falling afoul of variables that you can't blame them for, but that there's a consequence to those actions that Tottenham shouldn't have to be a part of. Like, Aston Villa pushed the boundary too much. And so Villa fans right now feeling the pinch. Well, they've had a horrible window. But at least if you're an Aston Villa fan, you have 2 things that you can at least identify as the reason as to why they're struggling to get the business done. One is they spent too much money, and the rules, at least for European competition, not so much Premier League, but for the UEFA rules, you know, it looks like they have to pay the piper a little bit. And if it wasn't for option 2, factor 2, which is the horrendous refereeing decision that cost them Champions League football on the last day of the season, then they'd be in a much better spot. So like the bad luck or the justice, the sort of just desserts, however you want to sort of divvy it up, at the end of the day, they kind of were robbed of Champions League football. Now, you could make the argument, and I always do, that they would only have got there through their misspend within a tournament that allows them to operate in that regard, to qualify for a tournament that doesn't. But either way, the kind of consequences are that through the double effect of overspend and through a bad refereeing mistake, that can at least explain the inactivity that we're seeing at Aston Villa. And at Newcastle United, at least they're trying. They've gone and punched above their weight. They're trying to punch above their weight. They're doing the things, they're swinging the bat at the fastball or the curveball, and they're missing. They've missed a lot. They've had a really disappointing window that has come around from essentially going after players that are probably above their weight. They're punching above their weight. They're trying to. And whenever somebody bigger than them has come in and said, don't go there, come here, or in the case of, for example, Ekitike, Liverpool phoned them up and said, you can have Ekitike or you can have Isak, but you can't have both. And they said, well, you can't have Isak. They said, okay, fine, we'll take Ekitike. And then it turns out that Isak now wants to go anyway. Like, you can understand why Newcastle fans are a little bit upset, but at the same time, for the most part, they played by the rules, but they've shown some ambition. They've reached for the stars, they just haven't really landed on anything yet, apart from an Anthony Elanga that for me doesn't really suit the model that they're trying to, or the football style that they're trying to achieve. But at least they have come up short, they've come up wanting on an ambition level that you can't knock. I think that Newcastle just have to realise where they are in the pecking order and probably punch a little bit lower, and they should be able to get some of their business done. But apart from those two, like there's nobody else that's going through as unnecessarily a tumultuous time as what Tottenham are. Tottenham just seem to be, I don't know how to say it. It feels like they are, they're not trying. They do have the money. Maybe that they're being cop-blocked by their own players that don't want to leave, but at the end of the day, guys, like there's ways and means that you can manipulate that situation to make outcomes that you want more likely, and the method isn't to say things like, we'll let Sonny figure out his own future. We'll listen to him, what he wants, he'll get. I respect it, but it's not really something you would see from the sorts of teams that we're trying to be and the sorts of teams that we're aspiring to compete with again. And as I said in a previous show, the last show, it doesn't really matter even if Tottenham at this stage was to have the greatest final 5 weeks of the transfer window that we've ever had. I still think, regardless of who we sign from here, it doesn't matter. At this stage, I think that we will always end up in a scenario where even if we had a 10 out of 10 window, we will still end our window further away from the top four than we were at the start of the window, because those four have shown insane ambition, insane intention, insane willingness to compromise and to meet in the middle and to get things done, and leaving everybody else with the scraps. And that would be the case whether we had a 10 out of 10 window and a board that were ambitious or otherwise. But at the end of the day, we have seemingly walked into a scenario right now with that Gibbs-White fallout, that we are 5 weeks into a window with one new signing, 2 weeks wasted on a guy that didn't really move the needle anyway. And in the meantime, a hell of a lot of more relevant, more pertinent and more viable alternatives have fallen and gone in different directions. So whoever it is to blame, whether you're thinking it's Daniel Levy, but when the good comes in, it was Vinay, but when the bad, it's Levy, whatever, I'll leave you to your thing. But if or however you want to allocate the blame, there is blame to be allocated, because right now we are 3 days away from our overseas tour and we are seemingly nowhere closer to bringing anybody else in. And we have wasted a hell of a lot of time on bringing in, or trying to bring in, a player that should have been someone that we filled at the end of the window at best, or at worst even, and at best left alone altogether, whilst we figured out a solution for a winger, a left winger that we can attack, take on specialists on both sides, a better striker that's a 20 goal a season guy most of the time, not as one-offs, a six that really shouldn't be that hard considering the value of the players that are out there that can move the needle, and someone to come in at left back and a left-sided centre-back cover. Those were the priorities. None of them have been attacked. None of them have been achieved. And whichever side of the oche you are on, whichever side of the Tottenham spectrum you fall, whether you lean positive, you lean negative, you hate certain people, you appreciate where we are at in the pecking order, wherever you land at the moment, it is a shit show. And I'm really, really concerned by the fact that the second that the Gibbs-White story broke, that there weren't several stories immediately on the up. Where is Paratici? The silence of all transfer links, the very few and far between substantial links that we've been hearing about for the last 5 or 6 weeks, it screams to me that this is a Johan Lang window, not a Don Paratici window. And I think therein lies the problem. Because if Daniel Levy was still in charge, still pulling the strings, if he was, then I would imagine that Don Paratici would have a little bit more to say, because their relationship is close. If it's true that Vinay is now calling the shots and that Charrington is now his boss in a nutshell, and that Daniel Levy has been sort of sidelined, well, we don't know what their relationship is with Don Paratici. And so it leaves you with this uncomfortable feeling that the solution, the guy that you need to come in with a rat-a-ta-ta at this stage, someone just to make you go bang, or some stories to percolate that make you go, yes please, let's talk about that. The absence of them suggests to me the absence of Paratici in the conversation, and that to me is a bigger concern than who it is that's calling the shots and who it is that is really running the show, because you need a director of football with relationships to be able to nurture, to be able to call upon people that pick up a phone when they ring. And for me, I think that Don Paratici needs to get back to the party very soon. Let me know your thoughts. Like, subscribe and comment. I'll see you on Monday for the second episode of the Spurs 5. Bye.